Why decoherence does not produce outcomes. Stability, invariant measures, and collapse in quantum theory. Decoherence theory explains why quantum interference becomes unobservable at macroscopic scales, yet it does not explain why a single outcome is realized in measurement. Objective collapse models introduce additional stochastic mechanisms, but these remain constrained and controversial. This article explains the measurement problem by reframing collapse as a stability issue rather than a physical interruption. Drawing on standard results from stochastic dynamical systems and Lyapunov theory, we show how outcome selection can be understood as the loss of an invariant description. A minimal toy model is introduced purely as a didactic device to illustrate how collapse-like behavior generically arises when stability conditions fail. No new physical theory is proposed. The measurement problem in its modern form. Quantum mechanics predicts probabilities with extraordinary accuracy, but it does not specify how a single outcome becomes actual. This tension is not resolved by improved experimental precision, it is structural. Decoherence theory, pioneered by Zay and Zurek, explains how interaction with an environment suppresses interference between branches of a superposed state. Reduced density matrices become approximately diagonal in a preferred basis, producing classical-looking statistics. What decoherence does not do is select an outcome. All branches remain present in the global description. Decoherence explains why we do not see interference, not why we see one result. This distinction is well understood in the literature and motivates both interpretational approaches and objective collapse models. Objective collapse models and their role. Objective collapse models such as GRW and CSL attempt to address outcome selection by modifying quantum dynamics. They introduce stochastic terms that localize the wave function, producing definite outcomes. These models are mathematically consistent and phenomenologically successful, but they require additional parameters and mechanisms not derived from standard quantum theory. Moreover, experimental bounds increasingly constrain their viable parameter space. Regardless of one's view on collapse models, they highlight an important point: outcome selection requires something beyond decoherence alone. The question then becomes not which mechanism is correct, but what kind of explanation outcome selection demands. Collapse as a stability problem. In many areas of physics, qualitative changes in behavior arise not because a new force is introduced, but because a previously stable regime ceases to exist. Examples include phase transitions, bifurcations, and turbulence. This suggests a reframing of collapse. Rather than asking what physically collapses the wave function, one may ask under what conditions a superposed description remains dynamically admissible. If a system admits a stable invariant measure, multiple outcomes can coexist in a consistent description. If no such invariant exists, the system must transition to a reduced regime. This perspective does not replace quantum mechanics. It clarifies the logical structure of the measurement problem using standard tools from dynamical systems theory. Stability, invariance, and invariant measures. In stochastic dynamical systems, an invariant measure describes a statistical steady state. Its existence guarantees long-term stability in a probabilistic sense. Lyapunov functionals are commonly used to assess whether such invariant measures exist. If a suitable functional remains bounded, stability is ensured. If it fails, the system undergoes qualitative change. These concepts are textbook material in nonlinear dynamics and stochastic analysis. Applying them to collapse is not an ontological claim, but an explanatory move. A minimal toy model, illustrative only. To make the discussion concrete, we introduce a toy model. It is not derived from quantum mechanics and is not proposed as a physical law. Its sole purpose is to illustrate how stability considerations can lead to collapse-like behavior. We define two effective variables. E, T, a scalar representing the dynamical support for a superposition-like description. G, T, a structural or backreaction term encoding constraints on that support. The dynamics are given by the stochastic equations. dt equals kappa E, 1 plus alpha G, plus underscore E. dg, dt equals psi E squared beta G plus underscore G. These equations are chosen for minimality. Linear damping ensures boundedness. Quadratic coupling is the lowest order scalar influence of E on G. Additive noise represents generic fluctuations. No quantum interpretation is assumed. An invariant functional and regime admissibility. We introduce a Lyapunov-like functional. I equals E squared plus AG squared. This functional is positive definite and serves as a stability diagnostic. It is not conserved. Its boundedness determines whether the system admits an invariant measure. For I above a critical value I_c, the system supports long-lived fluctuations without irreversible selection. For I below I_c, no invariant measure exists. This threshold behavior is generic in nonlinear stochastic systems and does not rely on fine-tuning. Outcome selection as loss of invariance. When the invariant fails, the system cannot sustain its previous description. A regime change becomes unavoidable. In the toy model, this is represented phenomenologically by a rapid transition into a reduced state. This transition is not interpreted as a physical collapse event, but as the dynamical consequence of instability. The lesson is conceptual. Single outcomes arise because superposed descriptions stop being dynamically viable, not because they are externally interrupted. Numerical illustration and reproducibility. Because nonlinear stochastic systems resist closed-form analysis, the toy model has been implemented as an open numerical testbed. The implementation directly mirrors the equations presented, includes invariant tracking, and explores parameter regimes systematically. No additional assumptions are introduced at the computational level. Simulations confirm the analytic expectations. Stable regimes persist without selection, while invariant breakdown coincides with rapid regime transition. The code serves only to illustrate behavior already implied by the mathematics. Relation to established interpretations. Decoherence explains suppression of interference. Collapse models introduce explicit outcome selection. Many worlds interpretations deny collapse altogether. The stability perspective does not compete with these views. It clarifies the structural question they all confront: when is a superposed description dynamically admissible? Seen this way, collapse becomes less mysterious. It is the point at which a description fails, not an inexplicable physical jump. What this article does and does not claim. This article does not propose a new interpretation of quantum mechanics. It does not introduce new physical postulates or parameters. It explains how outcome selection can be understood using standard stability theory and invariant measures, illustrated by a deliberately simple toy system. Whether nature realizes collapse through such mechanisms is an empirical question. The conceptual point stands independently. Conclusion. The measurement problem is often framed as a question about physical collapse. Stability theory suggests a different framing. Collapse marks the failure of a superposed description to remain dynamically consistent. By understanding outcome selection as a consequence of invariant breakdown, we replace mystery with structure. Even as a purely explanatory lens, this perspective sharpens our understanding of one of quantum theory's deepest puzzles. By understanding outcome selection as a consequence of invariant breakdown, we replace mystery with structure. Even as a purely explanatory lens, this perspective sharpens our understanding of one of quantum theory's deepest puzzles.